Sometimes trailers are deceiving. When I first saw the trailer for The Night House, it led me to believe it was a kind of sci-fi horror. That's not really the case. I watched it. Should you? A grieving widow begins to uncover her recently deceased husband's disturbing secrets that lead her through a dark mystery as she searches for closure. Rebecca Hall stars in this, and if, like me, you watched the trailer and got a sci-fi vibe from it, this one sits more in the psychological or even supernatural horror genre than anything sci-fi. And aside from letting you know that this isn't a sci-fi horror, which I've said sci-fi a lot, this will be a spoiler-free review, so if you decide to see it, you can still enjoy the ride. There is a dark and foreboding atmosphere that surrounds the film, almost from the very beginning. We first tell from some visual clues that Rebecca Hall's character Beth has just come from a funeral and she's grieving. And a thought occurred to me also while I was watching this scene, and I wonder how many other cultures dress all in black for funerals. I mean, it's an instant visual clue for Americans, and probably other cultures as well, but does it instantly resonate and convey that message around the world? Alright, I digress. There is an ominous feeling that we get that begins early on, and it doesn't really let up throughout the film. Beth is totally an unreliable narrator in this story. This is brought about by her grief, combined with the fact that just about every time we see her, she has a bottle of brandy in her hand. Not a glass, a bottle. So she goes through the majority of the movie in some level of inebriated state, and Hall delivers a really raw performance here. Her reactions are both extreme and completely plausible. She has a level of obsession that plays out, and although it may not be the healthiest way to proceed, it is believable. And there's a really great scene where her character is talking with one of her students' parents. She basically says what we'd all love to say to a difficult person, or at least speak to them in the manner in which she does. Aside though from being bitingly humorous, it also illustrates her state of mind and her emotional well-being. Hall sells her performance perfectly as we watch Beth slowly descend farther and farther into her grief. The story unveils a mystery within the grieving process too. And while we don't know much about Beth's husband, there are clues that he was dealing with something, and the imagery becomes intriguing and then disturbing. This aspect does come with some issues though. Ideas and clues are presented but not fully explored or explained. Beth sees some things in a book, and we as the audience see portions too as the camera flashes over it. I think there was an opportunity to dive further into this area of the lore and make the overall story more compelling and then disturbing. I like how the movie plays with time too. We'll watch Beth close her eyes and then large chunks of time pass. Was she asleep? Did she pass out? Is there something else going on? There are a few times where it felt like there was misdirection happening too, and I really appreciated that. My mind went to several different scenarios and suspicions as the story played out, jumping from conclusion to conclusion because it seemingly would be the logical step. I liked though that I was wrong throughout. I mentioned that this had a foreboding atmosphere, and there were at least 3 distinct times that I just got full-on goosebumps. The way the camera moved and the use of shadows and music created a great amount of tension that became very creepy. There's also a great use of the settings to craft visuals. The way that the items line up in the eye line create optical illusions, which then the story takes full advantage of. There was also a time that effectively scared me, and I wouldn't call it a jump scare, even though I did jump in my seat. This wasn't a cheap fright, it was earned by the way that the scene was framed and then executed. In addition to Hall, we get 2 great performances that come from Vondie Curtis Hall and Sarah Goldberg. And there are elements to both of their characters that are caring and compassionate, but there's also an air of mystery to them, which then kept me intrigued as the plot unfolded. And while I really did enjoy the thrilling aspect and the creepy nature of the storytelling, I think the plot was a little overcomplicated. We have a grieving wife, we have the circumstances surrounding the death, the friend's angle, Beth's past, and then this mystery with the house itself, which is where the title comes from. In one of the trailers, it appears that there is a duplicate of Beth's house, just with a reverse floor plan. Now this avenue is explored some, but it's just one of the portions of the story. And all of the items I mentioned do converge and tie everything together for the most part. But there is still a lot of vagueness to areas of the plot, which I think can lessen the enjoyment to a degree. As the story progresses, there is a quickening of the pace that we feel, which I think adds to the excitement, but that also means that some of the story content feels rushed and underdeveloped. There is a resolute end to the story, but I think some of how we got there could be up for interpretation. And while that can be a little frustrating, I also appreciate that it makes me think and ponder what I've just watched. I get to work through many of the elements long after the credits roll to decipher some meanings and work through my interpretations. Now there's a lot of discombobulating imagery and camera movements that work to effectively keep us off kilter. I really enjoyed some of the effects that they employed just through the cinematography to transition us from one area of the setting to another. It had a confusing effect, which then matched perfectly to what Beth was experiencing. It put us right there in the middle of the story with her. The only thing that weakened those scenes was the lack of background for the circumstances. While I mentioned that I enjoyed how the movie ended, during portions in the middle, there were things that would open the door for explanation to give us clues to certain ideas, but further dialogue or information was needed to give us a better context for what we just saw. If that had been present, it would have created a much greater impact, and I think also a much darker story to what we experience. The movie is kind of quick at an hour and 48 minutes, and I was never bored, and I was glued to my seat and fully invested in what was playing out. Some portions were rushed, but that was more in the storytelling and details than in the overall pace. Overall, this was an effective psychological thriller with some weaker supernatural horror elements that still delivered chills. Rebecca Hall gives a spectacular and authentic performance wrought with real emotion that makes her both sympathetic and unstable. And while the mystery is engaging, the plot is a little overcomplicated with the need for some extra exposition to flesh out certain story points. I had fun with this one, and I loved how it grabbed me and freaked me out. I think there will be a lot of discussion surrounding this, and I can't wait to hear the different interpretations. There's no sex or nudity, a bunch of profanity, and a lot of violence. I give The Night House 4 out of 5 couches. Have you been looking forward to checking this one out? I'd love to know what you thought of it if you see it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.